2024. We'll go through and do the roll call. I'll start on the end with you, Dennis.
Dennis Minnick here.
Sharon Peters, Becky Hine, Diana Larson, and Tanya Long. All right, we will back here. Stand for the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda that we received after we received our packets. It was emailed to us. Did everybody? Yep, right? That was.
It was a revised one.
Right after
Yes.
our packet. So everybody was able to review that. I'm entertaining a motion to approve the agenda.
I make a motion to approve the agenda as revised.
I'll second. We'll take all those in favor of approving the agenda say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. Great. Now we will move into the consent agenda. Were there any questions, thoughts, something you want to add before we pass this? I just had one question. I saw on the outreach circulation, like, I didn't know if it was a typo or what, but like in 2024 for this month, it's like 1,912. And then in 2023, it was 187.
On the circulation? Oh, yes. Well, that's primarily the early literacy outreach that Kim's doing. She's doing daycare, and they've actually started to check out. We've been wanting them to, check out materials too. Yeah.
So it's like, okay, that's really.
It's quite an impact.
So I figured. Okay, if there's no more questions or anything, I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I make the motion to approve the consent agenda.
All those in favor of approving the consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say no. Great. We'll move on. We don't have any public comments this evening. We're down to unfinished business discussion items. First on the list is the capital improvement plan progress with Steve Potter. I'll give it to you to. How do we want to proceed?
Well, so I've invited Steve to come back. He's been on the facility tour. I've been and working with him on kind of just looking at planning to plan as far as the capital improvement plan. He wrote up an initial kind of report on what he was observing. You all have received that. You got to go on a facilities tour. So I've invited him. I thought it was a good point for him to come in. He can kind of go over what his initial report was. You guys can ask questions, and we can talk about recommended next steps involving the community needs assessment option. So,
Robert, I'm going to stay seated. Normally from last time, I like to stand up when I present, but I want to be in a position where I can take notes as you're asking me questions and things. So I think that's okay. The assessment that I wrote, in terms of the body of the assessment, it's about 3 pages. So hopefully you can stay awake before you got to do it. It wasn't too long. But there really is a very large question that I think really needs to be addressed by the board. And it really, it's your role as a policy making and direction setting body for the library district is to help Robin and help staff understand the point that I put in bold in here. What is the purpose and strategy for facilities? And helping to understand that. And there's a lot of different ways that libraries answer that question. In some cases, the question that our purpose for facilities is to store books. Perfectly fine. That's a great answer for one of them. But you might also have an answer that your purpose for facilities is to create third space. Space back to work, not your home, but to allow people to come in and do things like office hours or Zoom calls if they're small business and running their own business. It might be a gathering space for homeschoolers or early literacy, where families can come together and begin to learn those social skills before they go to school. It could be a place where people learn other skills other than traditional literacy, like financial literacy, technical literacy, things like that. All of those are very legitimate. There's very legitimate questions, very legitimate direction, but not, and no answer is right and no answer is wrong. But there has to be an understanding of what is the purpose and what is the idea. And once you begin to understand that, once you begin to understand this is our purpose and this is how we're going to use our buildings, then the other things begin to fall into place. You begin to understand, okay, do we need a dedicated space for small business people to go in and have Zoom meetings? Yes, if that's part of your purpose, and no, if it's not part of your purpose. So that's one of the big charges, and we have to figure that out, I think, as an organization. Once that's more aligned, then the other things begin to fall into place. But starting to look at sort of the micro levels, sort of the tactical stuff you can do. The first thing that I noticed was the restroom and baseline compliance. Your restrooms really do need to be refreshed and upgraded, and it's not just aesthetics. In some cases, I just visited the restroom again before I came here. It looks like it probably has the original 1980s vinyl tile. It's beyond its useful life. No amount of scrubbing and stripping and waxing is going to make it hygienic or clean. And so updating and upgrading is very important. Now, the problem is so many of your buildings are built at a time where ADA standards and things like that were different. So when we go in and start looking at making updates and upgrades, it may have larger impact in terms of staying in compliance with the new ADA. And so, I mean, that alone will make your libraries much more comfortable. There were also some issues of egress where it's just sort of noticed some of your doors are too hard to pull, some of the doors, like the door in here, doesn't really open right. I mean, the fact that it opens and sort of ramps into a stairway, that's not right. I mean, and potentially problematic. And so there was some ADA issues. I think we installed the new bridge that needed the parking lot isn't ideal, I don't believe. And it frankly should be a warranty issue. I mean, the people who did your construction should be things like that. But those are things that I think can all be addressed and can all be things that make it more welcoming for your community. I mean, everyone can feel welcome if they can make their way down the aisles, and everyone can feel welcome if the doors open in the right way. Another big issue that we saw were environmental conditions. Some of your buildings just felt, a little stuffy. Some of them felt like a little humid. Just the HVAC and environmental systems weren't keeping up across the board. Now, some of this is due to the hybrid ownership that you have. In some cases, the landlord isn't going to necessarily feel like they have to make their building as energy efficient as possible, especially if the library is responsible for paying the utility bills. And so what I've tended to discover is that when you own your building, that's when you tend to do things like, the weather stripping and do all the things you need to do in order to make it to achieve the maximum savings in terms of environment. When you don't own your buildings, then you're sort of at the mercy of the landlord. And in some cases, the landlord's not going to get around to doing some of this stuff. And in some cases, environmental conditions can be, like, for example, fresh air recirculation. Ideally, I believe you should refresh the air in a building once every 6 minutes. So 10 times an hour, you bring in new fresh air from the outside. Why do you do that? Well, you do that because it helps to decrease overall humidity. Even if it's humid outside, bringing outside air can help with the environment inside the building, decreases mold conditions, and recirculating the air can do things like decrease illness. The fact that there's more fresh air in the building, that your staff don't get sick, your visitors don't get sick. And so that's just a positive thing. But some of that is hard to control when you don't actually control the buildings themselves. So environmental conditions were something that needed to be addressed. Branding and consistency. And this is something I'm very familiar with my previous library where I worked. We used to have just a hodgepodge of branding. And there's something that you want to do. You want to make it feel like it's the community's library. And so it feels like Archie, you know, or feels like Pleasant Hill. And I think Pleasant Hill did a really nice job, actually. You know, there's like community pictures and things like that. But there's also some consistent branding and color palettes that I think can be used throughout the library system. So that whenever you go to a library, you feel like, oh, I'm in a larger organization. I'm not just in the Drexel Library, I'm in the Cass County Library. And you begin to have this, it doesn't mean you have to erase everything that's great about Garden City. You know, in order to do that, you know, McDonald's, I mean, lots of times you don't know if you're in a McDonald's in maybe Alaska. I mean, they all look the same. I'm not saying that you should do that, but I think there are some consistencies that you can have and in terms of your branding without necessarily sacrificing the local feel. And I think that that can help. It can also help your customers because if they go from one library to the next, they can begin to say, okay, I'm going to look for this thing that says these words that describe picture books or whatever, because they know what they're called in your community. Search consistency is another thing that's always very important. I feel like that's in good shape, but it is definitely worth an examination. And then the idea here, and you see this in a lot of libraries that haves and have-nots. You know, there's some libraries that have everything, and other libraries that don't have anything. I didn't see a lot of that discrepancy, but it's always worth making sure that, you know, just because you live in Belton doesn't mean that you get something special that you can't get in Drexel or something like that. And part of that's just being fair. I mean, everybody in the county pays the same tax rate, and so it's important to make sure that everybody has access to everything. Now, with that said, there are concepts like destination libraries that I mentioned in the report. And the idea there is that when you're figuring out what the purpose of the library is, you might identify something very special. Say, this is something really special that we want to do, but we don't want to do it everywhere. It's sufficient to do it one place in the county and just expect everybody to come there to do it. The one that seems like an obvious choice that you currently have is the genealogy branch. You can't and don't want people to genealogy everywhere. And so put it in one place and make sure that it's a good place, and then that's one that doesn't try to replicate. But it's on the story hours. You want to make sure there's story hours everywhere. You want to make sure that there's cookbooks everywhere, Wi-Fi, everything. Etc. The rest of the last one that I had was outreach. And with outreach, I'm really interested, again, this is sort of exploration and trying to figure out what the board would like to do, trying to figure out what staff would like to do. Because we have a couple of interesting outreach sort of alternative delivery systems in your library. You've got Bookmobile, you've got the kiosk at Peculiar, and you also, Peculiar, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Correct me if I say something wrong in terms of places. And then you have the Library by Mail, the Books by Mail program. And I think all three of those in some way kind of do a similar service. And I think it might be worth trying to figure out what's your return on investment, particularly with your bookmobile. What are you trying to do with that? What do you think to accomplish? If the primary purpose, and one of the things I discovered just by looking at some of the statistics that Lee gave me, was that it looks like a lot of people use your bookmobiles essentially just to pick up requested items. Well, it might actually be cheaper instead of putting gas in that vehicle and driving it halfway across the county. It might be easier just to mail it to the people. Just as an idea, and maybe use that bookmobile for a different purpose. But you really have to do the study. You have to figure out how much are we spending, how much are we spending on gas, how much are we spending on insurance. It doesn't mean that you don't need the vehicle. Maybe you can use the vehicle for something completely different. And brainstorm about that. But I think looking at outreach and how you're using that and what's the most cost-effective way to move forward with that, I think it's good. It's a good place to be. So what I identified in terms of your next steps is really trying to look at this idea of what is the purpose of the buildings. Also. I think it's really important that trying to figure out, when we're figuring out what are the purposes for the building, one of the things that may become clear is that uh, more generic spaces may not necessarily fit our need if we have a real specific purpose that the library may want to build something as opposed to rent something. And what was really interesting is, I'm not sure if Robin told you, but I invited one of my architect friends when the staff went on the tour. And we did just a couple of sort of back of the napkin calculations. And one of the things we discovered is that, like for example, if you stay in the North Resource Center for 20 years, you can use that rent to actually build the building. And it would be about the same, in terms of, and you would actually be able to build it to what you want, might be able to build a drive-through in it, things like that. If everything works to plan, not everything works to plan, but it was a back of the napkin calculation that's going down the highway, but it felt like it was pretty close. So, I mean, something to kind of keep in mind. Obviously, looking at consistent wayfinding, color palettes, and branding, as well as those standards. But what I would say is probably the most important next step for us in this room, staff, board, and I'll include myself if you wish to include me, is to do some community needs assessments. And the idea of a community needs assessment is that instead of us sort of guessing, well, this is what people in Northern Canada, this is what the people in the community want. You actually bring people together and find out. I have a very specific model for how I like to do these. Don't like to do focus groups. My understanding is, from my experience is, bring 100 people together and say, what do you want from the library? They'll say more books and longer hours, all of them. So I just saved you a bunch of time and money. That's what always comes back. For a community needs assessment, what you want to do is something a little different. What you want to do is you want to invite people that represent different segments of the community. So you might bring in a small business owner and make sure the small business owner understands you're not here necessarily to represent your small business. You're here to represent small business owners. You might bring in a school principal or a superintendent. Again, not about this person's school, but education. They're here to represent education. And you bring in about 12 or 15 people. And then the idea is that we demonstrate some of the great demographics. I want to commend Robin and the board for all of the staff hiring that you've done so far, just as an aside, because the people that I ran into on the tour were fabulous, very helpful. Everyone that I met, and what brought this to mind is some of the piles of information that Lee gave me in terms of demographics. He's done great work in terms of describing your community to me numerically. And so what we would do in a community needs assessment, we would do that with these 15 people, kind of let them know, this is what you might be seeing, but this is what the numbers say. This is the average distance that someone drives to work, and this is the average educational attainment, and these are the types of jobs that people have who live here, et cetera, et cetera. And then we talk a little bit about the ideal community. We try to ask them to envision what does the ideal community look like? And that's a hard exercise because they always want to go to the library. And it's not about the library yet. It's about what does the ideal rainbow look like? What does the ideal peculiar look like? And we talk about that. And after we begin to get a consensus of what does the ideal community look like, then we say, okay, now, what are the library appropriate responses to get to that ideal community? And the answer will never be more books and longer hours when that's the question. It'll be things like, we need more story time opportunities. We need an opportunity to have early literacy that's at odd times because people work weird hours. And that's what's going to make the ideal community. And when you start getting answers like that, that's when you can begin to say, okay, we need 3 program rooms, not 2. We need, this, not that in our space, because then you're beginning to respond to what the community needs. So Robin and I talked about this, and the idea of doing at least 1 or 2, maybe north and south community needs assessments. And that would be sort of our next strategy that we would potentially bring to you and say, this is what the public's telling us. So I think that, I mean, without getting into much more detail, and I don't want, I feel like I've already talked too much. I feel like I should be, fielding more questions. But Robin, do you feel like that hit the items?
I think so.
Okay, so let me pause for now and take some questions and see how we can help with next steps.
As I read over this,
Yeah.
all of it, and as we visited, I mean, there isn't any branch that I want to close or anything, but I know that there are growing communities that, what are some standards in terms of, two standards, in terms of population? What, because I know our smaller communities are too small by some standards to have their own library, but it is so important to that community.
Right.
So I'm not, what are some standards in terms of population, and what are some standards into how far does a person have to be from a library that will keep them from going to that library or using that library?
Okay. Yeah, those are very valid and very good questions. And in terms of population standards, I haven't seen anything uniform in terms of a population standard.
Okay.
In terms of, the library I came from, we had libraries in communities of 500 people.
Right.
And we also had community, when we first started doing our building program, sort of our benchmark was when a community got about 20,000 people, they needed to have a second branch in the
Okay.
community.
Okay.
And so what I would argue in terms of community is it may not be city limits that you're talking about, but service area.
Right.
So if you have a certain service area, then that would be.
And when you look at some of our faster growing areas of Cass County, we are lacking.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, some of the demographics that I was looking at, but yeah, in terms of population standard, there really isn't a one size. Now, in terms of your next standards distance from the library, I have seen that in a couple of different places. And so one of the places that the Johnson County, Kansas Library used to have a standard that they didn't want anybody living, I think Mona said it was like a 15-minute drive. They didn't want anyone more than a 15-minute drive from a library, which to me is real dicey because, I mean, you take into account traffic and all kinds of other things, which is kind of interesting. And one of the things we discovered at my previous library is that, we had urban, suburban, exurban, and rural libraries. And when we went to our rural libraries and would talk to those folks, we realized that when they got in their vehicle, they realized minimum they're driving 10 miles. If they're going anywhere, they're driving 10 miles. So the whole idea of saying, you have to be within 5 miles, well, doesn't make any sense there.
But there is a point where they say too far.
Too far, right. And so, what we tended to discover is when you're looking at a rural community or an exurban community, sort of like between suburban and rural, however far people typically drive to go to the grocery store, to go to their Walmart, that's the maximum distance. And so, stop in the middle of the city, draw the circle, and figure out what that is. Normally, that's in the neighborhood of 10, 15 miles is usually what it is there. In suburban areas, it tends to be a smaller physical distance, often because traffic congestion requires longer time to drive. So we were drawing 5-mile circles around our suburban branches, and that's what we were capturing as service population areas.
I worry about our western side of Cass County. We got that corner of southwest Cass County with Drexel.
Yes.
And we're kind of east central with Garden City.
Mm-hmm.
Archie's right there on the highway, which runs down the center. And you talked about, we need to figure out what the bookmobile is for. The bookmobile may be for that western side. Freeman, Cleveland, some of those places over there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how much those people, a lot of them, they go and they shop over in Kansas. They don't shop,
Right.
They may live along that way because they work over in that area. And I don't want us to ignore that area of the county.
Right. And what you can do in some areas like that, where you have low population density, and that people might just, drive the wrong direction, if you will, is co-location tends to make a lot of sense there. So so the idea there is to try to find another community need, another community service,
Okay.
and co-locate with them. Whether it's, there have been many successful co-location ideas that we've seen. Pre-pandemic, as the U.S. Postal Service was looking to close a lot of post offices, a lot of libraries co-located with post offices. And then that became something where you got a little bit of resource from the Postal Service and a little bit of economy of scale, more people using the one physical location. Schools are a hit and miss in terms of co-location. Community centers, a good friend of mine in Texas right now is building a new library that's co-located with a community center.
We tried to do that once at Belton with the High Blue Wellness. We talked about it with them. Never got past the talking.
Oh, it's hard.
But it was, again, we would have been leasing from them, but we talked about it at the Belton situation one time but there wasn't time to get it done in the time that we had the deadline to move when we were being forced to move.
Yeah, I remember here, or learning about that. But yeah, co-location is a way to manage larger reach without necessarily, building.
Oh, thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Did I help on the other two questions? Okay.
I'll take you back to ADA compliance.
Okay.
So if we start, let's say we start in the worst one, whichever the worst one is, and we remodel bathrooms.
Yeah.
We're going to trigger other things.
Potentially.
And that's just for that location. We wouldn't trigger like a system wide and go, oh, you've touched one, you need to touch them all.
No, it's built. Like
Okay, good.
Right. I mean,
Decide which one it is.
Yeah, how we pick is the worst.
yeah. My recollection or my understanding from, particularly from talking with Brad, because my architect friend, because he's been involved in a lot of these, and it's typically when you start the building, it goes building by building. Yeah. Now I was trying to remember, Ed, was Drexel the one that you had to go through the staff break room to get to the
Archie.
Oh, Archie.
Archie. But Garden City, you have to walk through the programming room.
Yeah, walk through the program.
Which is also the staff break room, so.
Right,
So it's
right.
both sort of similar in that way.
Okay. Yeah, but there was definitely many of the restrooms I'm looking at would not comply to ADA standards. It's
We'll have a hard time picking the worst.
right. So even the new facility, which what do we call the new facility in Harrisonville?
The next, yeah.
Yeah. So even the annex has some interesting opportunities, great opportunities for the library, for things like being able to receive materials because you have a legitimate loading dock there, which you don't have anywhere else. You have a place for storing the bookmobile, and then upstairs there's actually great space for things like meetings and other opportunities. But the restrooms are going to cause trouble, and we're going to have to get those addressed before.
So can you take me back with the idea of discovering your purpose for your buildings, your facilities? Would that then help us speak to the size of potential facilities? Because I know for a long time, or most of what I've ever heard is, well, but the population is this size, so we have to have a library of such nature because of the size of the population. But really what you're suggesting and saying is, no, we know why we're having the facilities, and then we build from that purpose forward. Because
That's my recommendation.
yeah, okay.
And so a lot of this gets down to, this is one of the differences on why you can't always run government like a business. It's one of my normal stump speeches. And you can't always run government like a business. In a business proposition, you would do things like say, okay, which of our Subway sandwich shops sells the least sandwiches? Okay, this one. So that's the one we're going to close. And Beyond as simple as that, right? But in terms, if you're looking at the purpose of your life, say your purpose is to make sure that you are ensuring all children enter school ready to read, at age 5. And so lots of early literacy. And what you begin to discover is that the community that's serving the smallest amount of people has the largest percentage of children under the age of 5. Well, you wouldn't want to close that one because that's where you're going to do your greatest good. So yeah, determining your purpose, determining where, what you want to stand on, what your 2 or 3 primary objectives are, will help you determine, which buildings can be larger, which buildings can be smaller, which services need to be where.
Okay, so then, when we talk about the community needs assessment, is that something um, that you would want members of the board to be a part of to hear those things, or would it be more, hey, you're gonna bring staff, you're gonna be there, and you're gonna bring back that report, or how does that tend to be the most successful?
Yeah, I've done both. I've done 2, well, not, I would argue that a lot of the community needs that we did around our levy were also community needs assessments. But when we did traditional community needs assessments around our strategic planning process, sometimes I have board members there, sometimes I didn't. But the main thing to understand is that this is a community needs assessment. I understand you all are part of the community too, but you all have a very important role part of that. So if board members wanted to attend the community needs assessment, I would be opposed to that. But the purpose would be to listen and to absorb as much as possible and to help with the interpretation after.
So you need help identifying people to participate.
Absolutely. That's going to be a big role as well, because I think Robin and Lee, I think they've got good, thinkers in the community to identify. But I've given Robin sort of I think I've given you this, some of like the outline of practices and some of the collateral.
I passed it along.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so yeah, I think helping staff identify some of the people. Like I said, I usually work 12 to 15 people. We may have to identify 20, 25 to get 12 to 15. So yes, the board can definitely help identify who those people are.
I definitely think just because the county is such a mix of more, I won't say urban because there's nothing urban, but about Cass County necessarily, but it's more suburban
I understand.
and rural,
I
that it would make sense in my mind to have something that's in both areas.
Like a north-south.
Like a north-south.
Right.
Because things really are very different from from the north of the county to the south of the county.
Mhm.
And I will say, just as far as those standards and distance from the library, I mean, we live south of Peculiar in the country, and we knew when we moved there, like, okay, we add 20 minutes to every place that we're going to go, just knowing, but that's what we chose to do. So you typically, if you're living in the rural area, you just know you have, it's not something we're worried about. Didn't go there to be close to things, I guess is my point.
No,
Nick.
That's
Not
true.
looking for convenience when we move to rural areas.
That is what we discovered every time that we did our community needs assessments in rural and suburban communities.
Yeah.
Was the same thing.
So do you need something from us today? Is there a timeline in your mind of how, just sort of, we've got the next step of doing this, kind of what you need or timeline, or how can we proceed?
Well, I think the important thing for me was to share this with you all and get some feedback and answer some questions. And so thank you for the questions, and thank you for your attention, and thank you for the feedback. I promised Robin that I would do a little bit of notes and send those to her tomorrow, and that we would get together and try to figure out next steps. So if you wanted to figure out next steps if I wasn't in the room, that's fine. I mean, your decision could be, well, we've learned enough from Steve, we can take it from here, and that's fine if you want to do that. But if not, then the next step, I think, would be to begin to identify those north and south community needs assessments, realizing that we are starting to get toward the end of the year with the holidays and all of that. And so, you know, by the time we identify people, it might not be until after the first of the year, you know, just because of holidays and weather and all of that, that we've actually do the two needs assessments. But I think that that's going to begin to start to push in a really good shape for 2025 for the coming year. I don't know. I may be stepping on your toes. You may have a different schedule.
No, I don't know. It does seem like it'd be tough to squeeze it in by the end of the year.
Right.
Yeah, people get really busy.
Mhm.
So, okay.
Does that sound all right? Okay.
I mean, we want it yesterday, but.
Yeah.
Of course.
Right, so.
Yeah.
We're
But
just making plans, yeah.
But it makes sense to recognize that we're middle of October now. Probably gonna, if we can, I mean, we also can get them identified and scheduled to be in the first of the year,
Well, and I think
before
you-
the end of the year.
I think you
That'd be
can.
Awesome.
I think that can be done.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. All right. Thank you, Steve.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Cindy.
Well, thank you. I hope you have a good rest of your meeting. And yeah, it's not my birthday this time.
That would have been strange if it was.
It would, yeah. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Steve.
Absolutely.
Have a good evening. Okay, moving on to the 2025 proposals budget. This is the same budget that we looked at and went through in discussions at a work session on, was it the 9th?
Yeah, so a week ago today. And so it is the same numbers. The only thing that's still pending is, as we talked about last week, is that personnel budget, because of the salaries based on performance evaluations that we're in the midst of, and the health insurance premium amount being calculated in there. Right now, it has a projected amount in there.
Was there any additional questions that came to your mind between last week and now that we want to discuss here? Otherwise, really, I mean, we're looking at the little tweaks along the way, but next month, taking a vote on this, so seriously, if you're like, yeah, I don't know about this, it, you know, between now and next month, the time to talk about it.
Well, when we get especially the health insurance, can you email us what it is?
I mean, obviously, we'll be able to discuss it at next month's meeting, those types of things, but obviously, everything else, we ought to be able to say, at this point, either I still have questions and want to discuss, or I'm good with where things are, and those little tweaks could probably be, you know, especially if you email, they can be discussed at the meeting next month prior to actually taking the vote. So, all that, yeah, is there any additional questions that came as a result of? I was just gonna say, Robin, for your, you know, your first budget, doing your thing, like it was super helpful. I think that as time has gone on since the levy has passed, it seems like there's just that more honing of being able to, you know, say, this is where we want these monies to go, and this is how much we want and need to spend on these things. And I appreciate you having a specific line item in there for capital improvements. Love it to be more if it can, but at least there's that, so.
It's at least showing intention.
Yes.
Was what I was going for.
Yes. So, okay, well, if there were no issues with that, so we'll move on to new business action items that are most of investments renewal. I'm guessing Lori's taking over on this.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so here is what we're talking about. Our investment for the 12-month CDs. Most of were purchased last year about this time. So at our October meeting last year, we made motion to purchase those. So we have 600,000 in reserve and 150 earmarked for endowment. So we started with most of it 2 years ago. I think Becky remembers. So Becky, Danny, and Tanya probably remember doing those from last year. We got a really good rate last year. And on that, you know, right there is the statement that I always include every month, so you can see the breakout right there. So we will get a total, when they expire there, October 28th, we'll get a total of 8,717 for endowment. And we'll get a total of 34,700 in our general operating for interest income, which is excellent. That's the most we've had for many years. So rates started going down in September, and they're continuing to go down. So, I mean, right now, for about the last 3 weeks, I get an email every week from OSIP and gives me their rates. So for about the last 3 weeks, it's been 4.35. So my guess would be in a couple weeks when they email us and we have about a 48-hour window to purchase those, is what looks like happened last year. So, they should be between 4 and 4.3 would be my guess. So,
Is that for the same, is that for a year, or have you been looking at some
Yeah.
of the shorter term ones as well?
no, that's, I mean, most of it just offers 365 day.
Do they? Okay.
Yeah, I don't.
What at one time we had, maybe it wasn't, maybe it was before MOSIP, I was just thinking at one time we had like, before P Hill, we had money like 6 months in a CD or something like that.
Yeah, we did, and they do offer, but our lower rates.
Okay, I don't
So,
know if the
yeah.
rate was as,
Yeah.
was better or not. Yep. For the longest time, those short-term rates were really good.
Mhm. Yeah. So they have 108 days, 270 days, and 365 days. But I guess
The best rates are at the 365 days. a year.
actually my last email, no, it was 4.55 for the 6 month. 4.35 was the 270 days, which is 9 months, and then 4.35 was the 12 month.
What was the 270 days?
4.35,
Okay.
I guess was the same. So.
Is there any need looking into the future that we should only do 6 months?
No, it depends.
Yeah, I was wondering
I don't
about-
foresee, I don't have anything that's like, oh, I really think we need to be careful and try to have that available in 6 months.
So really the biggest thing would be, do we expect the rates to continue to go down, but in 6 months we might have, I mean, because right now, obviously the rate is better at 6 months, but what's it gonna do in 6 months? So I guess that's something for the board to determine. But we need to do something with the money, I guess is the point of it being on the agenda. We need to decide how long. Do we want to renew those and for how long?
Yes, we do want to renew them, and we do want to renew with MOSIP. When you compare the past history with calling home to every little bank, or, we tried to keep it all in Cass County, and they tried to do us right, but banks get sold and things get moved around, and so MOSIP, and it's just a much better situation. So I do recommend that we go ahead and go with MOSIP.
I would agree with that.
We do a 6 month, it can be 2.5 for the other 6 months, while we can sign on to a sure thing of 4.35 for a full year. That's not going to be that significant of a less money.
I agree. They've been going down for about 6 weeks now.
Yeah.
That's the trend that they're going to continue to go down. So that would be my recommendation, is to
I
reinvest.
make a motion, or any other questions? I'm sorry, I'm talking out loud. Sure, just wrap it up. I make a motion that we authorize Lori Schneider to invest the reserve funds and the endowment funds. Do you need the amounts? The reserve funds of $600,000 and the endowment funds of $150,000 in MOSIP for 365 days at the best available rate she can get through MOSIP. I'll second that.
Right, we will take the roll call vote. This is to reinvest the 600,000 in reserve funds in a 1-year CD and $150,000 in endowment fund and 1-year CD at the best rate that Lori is able to get. Dennis.
Aye.
Sherry. Aye. Becky.
Aye.
Diane. Aye. Tanya, yes. Perfect. Is the Dennis Harrisonville.
Yes. So in the course of identifying opportunities for a capital improvement plan, I recommend that the library plan to move both the Harrisonville branch and the library's administrative offices from the current location at 400 East Mechanic Street to more adequate locations within Harrisonville. This move would ideally take place within the next 3 to 5 years. The administration has outgrown its office space in the existing building, and the library branch has reached the limit of feasible modern upgrades. Relocating will allow us to better serve the community with spaces designed for future growth and enhanced services.
Any thoughts on that, or think that seems pretty, as we've been starting this process of the capital improvement plan and hearing, just Steve's assessment. Obviously, when I read it, I was like, well, that's spot on. I mean, he's really got, he made good assessments, and that seems like a good recommendation from my vantage point. We're not locking ourselves into a specific time frame, but we're saying, hey, this is future, what we're planning, what we're looking to do.
It's going to take us a while to find. They don't have to both be in the same location.
We can look at that as an option. It just depends on where we
Right.
go and all of that.
The only question I was thinking is, do we see, is there just a significant benefit because it's more centrally located to have admin in Harrisonville, or is it possible that, is it because of the central location?
I think
to
it makes the most
I mean, it makes
sense.
sense. I just wondered if something came up somewhere else that's all I was wondering about.
I think if you think about other Missouri County libraries, they're usually in the county seat. That admin is in the county seat. Trails Regional's in Warrensburg, even though it covers 3 counties, but it usually is. Well, I would make a motion for the library to sell our 20% interest in the building at 400 East Mechanic, with plans to relocate in the next 3 to 5 years.
A second.
We'll take a roll call vote to look to the library selling their percent in the Harrisonville building to relocate in 3 to 5 years. Take a roll call. Dennis.
Aye.
Sherry.
Aye.
Becky.
Aye.
Diana.
Aye.
Tanya, yes. We move on to the director's reports. Yeah.
Okay. So in September, we hired a couple more people. We hired Crispin Kimbrell here at Harrisonville for a 30-hour library assistant position. And on our second attempt, we did hire a 24-hour IT specialist, Tiago D'Andrade. I'm sure I butchered his name, but I have not met him yet, and I hope it wasn't too bad. We have 3 current openings, part-time library assistant positions at NRC, Archie, and Harrisonville. We interviewed at NRC today. Archie is next week. There's 2 positions there, and Harrisonville soon. Other things that we did this month, a lot of us, 19 of us went to the MLA conference. It was in Kansas City, so we tried to use it as an opportunity to spend our staff development money and get as many people there as could come while still staffing our branches. But I think everybody that went wanted to go and got a lot out of it. So also wanted to mention that Janet and Sarah both were on the MLA planning committee and put in a lot of time and effort to make that event go off as well as it did. So that was excellent representation for us. And as Robin mentioned, the rest of the times for most managers and staff has been putting together performance evaluations and going through that process. And we are attempting to wrap that up by the end of this month so that everyone will know raises and things like that. But uh, yeah, we're getting very close to wrapping that process up too.
I have a question for you. I'm
Sure.
curious, when you put out, like wherever on Facebook and all those places where you say we have these openings, do you get quite a few applications
It greatly depends
on the position?
on the position, on the location,
Mhm.
on the number of hours offered. We have gotten more recently with some of the changes that we've made to how many hours we're offering and adding some flexibility to that. So it's only been one interview process that we've done that in, but as far as the other open positions, we have gotten more and more applicants to those than recently. So yeah, we think that's a positive change.
Yeah. And then, like for an assistant, what is a qualification for, what are you guys looking for? I'm just thinking, if I run across somebody, or if we
Yeah.
run across somebody that we think would be good to send them your way,
I,
because I have no idea what the qualifications would be.
sure. A lot of the things that we look for are the main thing we look at is customer service abilities, and a lot of that comes with experience doing that. That goes a long way. That doesn't mean that someone could do this job with a limited job experience, but we look at education as well. Um, what else do we look at? I do think customer service is what we're really focusing on now. Being able to understand what a library does and then greet all the different types of people that come into the library um, in a way that helps them accomplish all the various different things that they might have come in for with a smile and with a willingness to help. So hopefully that
Yeah,
helps.
that's helpful.
So yes, if you see any of those people, please do send them our way.
Okay. Just a few updates. Um, the annex, the construction for the garage door is complete. And that just happened this week. But a little interesting aside, and Zach has photos if you want to see them. But we had a new stowaway when the building was open and they had torn out the old doors. A raccoon had come and made started nesting in the walls, and we just happened to know about it because we saw him when we were out there one day. And but he's been trapped now as of this morning, I believe, and he did not look happy in the picture that I saw. But now the building is closed and he is out.
You're gonna relocate his
Evicted.
park.
Presumably raccoonless.
Yeah.
Yes, presumably so. He did do a little damage to some of the new insulation that we had in the garage, but we'll get that taken care of. So, but that was kind of a little interesting, a little interesting thing. Yeah. The Pleasant Hill sewage pipe, I already noted, starting tomorrow, they're going to work on it. I want to correct one thing I wrote in there. The reason that we're closing the building is not because the water's being turned off. That corrected me, and I can't let that go without correcting to you. It's because they don't want anyone flushing the toilets while they're trying to work on it. And if we're not going to have access to facilities, I'm not going to have a building open for that. So I wanted to correct that. And then also Monday there was like a surprise backup. It's like something got caught, and so that had to get cleaned out, and that had backed up a little bit into the basement, and so yeah, Zach got out there and got that cleaned up for us and everything.
So they're expecting just one day?
One day of the pipe being disconnected,
Okay.
and then the second day is really just backfill and getting the road to be going in.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay.
And as of yesterday, so you all saw the Garden City parking lot has got nice, fresh new paving. And if you remember, it's pretty straight for like if you drive up to the building, you could, if you wanted to, you could just go right on in through the front glass. So as of yesterday, there are now bumpers. So that of course will help prevent anyone from accidentally sliding up a little too close to the building. It kind of also, because there's not painted lines, it kind of helps delineate. It gives you a sense of space where the parking would happen, including the handicap place as well. So just some things that have happened recently.
Anything else? We've got the trustee reports. I don't think everybody's had anything.
I do.
Oh, you do.
We had a public foundation meeting on Monday. Um, we had just about everybody there except for one of our members. We'll vote a new slate of officers in January, and we're reviewing our bylaws. They had not been looked at since 2010. We had an update from Robin and Scott on the foundation did help fund some of the professional development day at North Kansas City. And as they develop the story walk at Pleasant Hill, some funds from the foundation will be going towards that. We might have one or two people rotating off the board. So if you know of anybody in the area that would like to serve on the foundation board, have them contact Robin or myself.
How many people are typically on the foundation board?
15 is the maximum amount according to the bylaws.
Okay.
And Robin and Scott are ex officio. And I'm not ex officio. I have voting rights on the foundation, but I represent the board.
Gotcha. Any other trustee comments?
I have a question. On the director's report, we skipped over the roof at the annex. And I'm just, the price just kind of wows me. But there's one thing here on, I guess, the bid that you're looking at that can't be right. So it's either a typo or something's bizarre because it says that they'll install fluid applied membrane at 2 to 3 gallons per square foot.
Can you, which bid are you looking at?
RJ's irrigation.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty heavy.
Yeah, is that actually 100 square feet or?
I can ask for clarification on that.
Please do.
That's a typo.
Roughly.
I'd like to know the guarantee on this RJ's bid.
That's the thing outside project.
Their warranty. Weren't they still supposed to send something over?
Yes.
Okay.
And this one's just for half of
That's
this.
just for half. We have one for full also. The half one is the one that got into the packet. The full one was about the same thing, 25,000.
From this company you're saying?
Yes.
The full one approximately the same price.
Yeah.
And how does that compare to an entirely new roof?
That's the next step of trying to see the pricing out.
I don't know. That doesn't sound like something we want to do. A brand new metal roof.
At least see pricing out, definitely.
I mean, we could always have that information, but I feel like that's more like in the 6-figure range.
Yeah, we put a new metal roof on it's obviously a smaller building. We've got like a 60 by 48 shop that we put a new metal roof on this year, and it was less than this.
Go ahead, Jeff. Yeah, I mean, yeah, and then we can speak what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, $25,000 seems like an awful lot for a patch, in essence. So, and I would also be curious, and obviously, if you're talking 6 figures, that's a big difference. But if we're talking a minimal difference, what lifespan, as opposed to patching this. But Yeah, but maybe we could save some money if they'd go down to like a quarter of an inch per square foot or something.
I'm not sure what that typo.
Yeah.
I can't say because we've had meetings with these workers trying to get clarification. From it, if it's okay, we can kind of express on
Yeah,
what they explain. They pretty much said this coating is supposed to naturally expand the roof life about 10 to about 15 years. And it's not just the thing is it's not would just be a patching; it would be an overall coating over the whole roof. I'm not saying it's the best case scenario or like the thing we should do, as I don't think it'd be a horrible idea. Maybe get more options out there, but it is more than a patching, I guess I could say. Essentially, is mostly the biggest deal is those as Sherry and I were talking is the screws. They have a rubber gasket that goes around them, and well, those rubber gaskets eventually could, disintegrate, and they say that's just a water gap. And it's not that the metal's obviously gone bad. It's just you have a whole bunch of manholes now, all around the roof.
Yeah, there's a hole where every screw or nail, whatever,
And
that
in
gasket's
every world, you
gone.
could just replace those screws, but the labor cost behind that is astronomical at that point. So,
And I'm just curious, after you bought the building, you said there'd be about $50,000 in renovation work. Was this in part of that, or is
No,
this
I wasn't
on top of
aware of
that?
any.
sadly, we had when we first got the place, there was kind of a drought. Now we're back in one, and then we had kind of a monsoon moment of a lot of rain, and that's when I noticed all those leaks. And it was not apparent when we first were getting the place.
So yeah, we're still looking at options. I just wanted to give you what we had so far.
Okay. I was curious because you did make a comment that wanting to get it done right away, but it got
If we get the information, yeah.
Thank you.
Right, if there is nothing else, then I will have a motion to recess to executive session.
Motion to recess to legal.
I second it.
Executive session for legal. Technically, I should be saying.
But that's that.
Missouri Revised Statute 610.021.1. Roll call. Dennis.
Uh,
Sherry. Becky. And